thank everyone for coming. I'd like to thank our panelists and my colleagues here for making my life easy, because they're going to have a wonderful discussion, meaning that I won't have to say much at all. And I will introduce them, or they will introduce themselves in a moment. The panel is, are we ready for a cashless society? I do have about $100 in cash on me, so I guess I'm not quite ready yet, but close. And I wanted to quote a couple of statistics that I looked up just before that to put a little context. First of all, I'd say we have 3 different points of view. You see here, I think. We have a gentleman from the ATM Council. We have someone from MasterCard, which obviously has a little bit more of a consumer view. And we have someone from P-Pros, which has a bit more of the B2B point of view. So 3 different points on the question. As to a few stats. First of all, there's 470,000 ATMs in the US alone. That's a lot of them. And it's at a peak compared to where it's been. Second of all, there were 110,000 ATMs in 1996, just to let you know how far it's grown. Wrote them down here. In the US, according to Statista, which I use a lot, 50% of US merchants accept Apple Pay now. Only about 3% of people actually use Apple Pay, but it's growing. Samsung, which is the number 10 mobile wallet, is accepted by about 20% of merchants at this moment. Apple Pay is obviously number 1. There will be about $190 billion transacted through Apple Pay and mobile wallets in 2021, which, given that we have a $21 trillion economy, is pretty still small. It gives lots of room for growth, hence we're all here and we're all interested. There were 383 million Apple Pay users worldwide, compared to 127 million in 2017. So it's growing rapidly as they expand from country to country. And on cash, there's $1.7 trillion in cash in circulation in the US dollar alone. And that's growing at 5% a year still. Even though we all think cash is disappearing, it obviously is still growing. 32% of transactions in the US economy are done in cash. That's not by dollar value, it's by number of transactions. That is down, however, from 40% in 2012. So that gives you a little bit of context. And with that, I'm going to begin with Elliot, who I believe is on the far end, and let him introduce himself and tell us what he is about in his company. And I said I always like to ask one question that's for fun. And today I'm skipping sports. What's your favorite rock and roll band? Would be my favorite question.
Okay, so favorite rock and roll band would be Led Zeppelin.
All right.
Thank you. That's mine, not MasterCard's, obviously. I can't speak for them, but it probably would be. So my name's Ellie Goldenberg. I work in the digital payments and labs part of our business. I'm focused on the agenda as it relates to a number of kind of key principles, I guess, for the purpose of this room. Tokenization, guest checkout, so secure remote commerce, as we've discussed. Disbursements with our Send platform, and the innovation agenda through our labs business.
And Catherine, would you like to?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am Catherine McClure. I run business development for P-Pro for the Americas, and what we do is we connect payment service providers and acquirers to local payment methods around the world. There's been a lot of talk today about how different people around the world like to pay for things, and sadly, it's not all Visa and MasterCard. That's okay, because we connect to over 150 different local payment methods around the world. And favorite rock and roll band is actually a really hard question. And this is proof that we were not told this in advance. It was not in the call.
Yeah.
Larry said, I'm going to have a question for you. And maybe we weren't smart enough to ask what it was, but I think you said you were going to make it up at the end, right before. So I'm going to go with Dave Matthews Band, because that's the first one that came to mind.
Okay.
Cool.
And Bruce, you're up.
Thank you, Larry. And thanks again, Marla and Dale and everyone involved with the conference, allowing us to be here. My favorite band, I don't have to think but 1 second, it's the Beatles. And everyone who knows me knows I'm a Beatle maniac. And I play music too, so if you want, I can play almost any Beatles song by heart without music. But that is a tough question, except for the Beatles. I'm Bruce Renard. I'm the Executive Director of the National ATM Council. I'm also an attorney and consultant to the financial services industry and the telecommunications industry. I I came back, go all the way back to the early days of telecom. When we first introduced competition, I was actively involved in the breakup of AT&T and who got to get the bell symbol, which at the time was a big issue. You know, the bell symbol was worth billions of dollars at that time and as intellectual property, and now none of the bell companies even want to use it. So I've had the privilege of seeing the merger of voice data and video over the last several decades. We've seen it coming, you know, and we take it all for granted now, right? It's all on our smartphone, voice data, video. They used to be television, right, and data and computing, and now it's all one. And previously, in my last stages in the heavy involvement in the telecom business, I ran the largest payphone company in the country, the publicly traded company with over 100,000 terminals all over the place. And of course, there used to be over 2 million payphones in this country, and now they're less than 50,000. So I've, you know, lived the technology change, and here we are in the ATM space, where a lot of payphone entrepreneurs moved into the ATM business. It was kind of a natural thing, and now we're looking at the potential of cashless, of going cashless, and the impacts of digital on cash. And obviously, without cash, there's not a whole lot of need for ATMs. So we are very focused on cash, the future of cash, and the notion of a cashless society. So looking forward to today's discussion.
My takeaway is that there's still 50,000 payphones in the U.S. Yeah. Am I the only one shocked by that?
Yeah, they're actually payphones still making money to this very day.
Good on them.
And some of them are making it on advertising, the smart ones, you know, advertising, enclosure advertising, and others are actually still used in certain communities.
Are they all on street corners in New York City? Or in casinos in Vegas, which is where I normally see them?
Well, what you're seeing in the city, and that's a good segue, but you see the Link unit, if you've been to the city recently, and that's about an 8-foot tall digital unit. It's the payphone of the future. I'm actually involved in other companies that are deploying these in other locations around the country. And it's an internet access point. It's a wayfinding digital information point. So even the payphone now is experiencing a bit of a phoenix.
So my Grateful Dead clothes in my closet could come back.
Yes, that
to
possible.
move back to the top, we learn something new every day, right, folks? My favorite band's The Who, and that's my ringtone. And as people will hear it go off, not today. I promised these guys a first question, which is very general, and it's probably close to what my last question is, which is we've been coming here for 7, 8, 9 years, and every year the panel session is something like, when are mobile wallets going to happen? When are we going to adopt? What about Apple phone? Because that was announced in September, about 6 years ago now. And Apple Pay, when is it going to adapt, and when is everyone going to get it? I'm just curious what you guys think. Are we there yet? Are we at a point where cash is beginning to drop off and where mobile is being adopted? Or, as my stats show, do we still have a long way to go? And what do you think will be the catalyst for that? Or the preserver, in the case of Bruce?
I can start with that. I think my take is I think that the pie is growing. I think there's more people entering into that ecosystem. Choices remains key, and creating flexibility for consumers to be able to use what they want, where they want, I think is going to be really important. Depends what you mean when we say, are we there yet, right? If you look into Scandinavia, they're there, right? Yeah. They're fully there, and they potentially, you could argue, have some challenges as a result of that. If you look at places like the UK, they're kind of almost there, right? Especially in certain parts. You talk about London, there's not that much requirement for cash, but people still accept cash, and there's still ATMs, and so the choice exists. When you then start to talk about some of the mobile payments specifically, I still think we haven't really scratched the surface. I know lots of people will point to the stats as being very low and not particularly impressive. And my take on that is that that will remain until it doesn't, right? And by that, I mean, I have 3 kids, and my view is that if they can't do anything on this, they just won't do it. So I see a tipping point when we look at demographics whereby some of these things are going to really start to spike when these people start to come into the economy more, providing the options exist.
Oh, Catherine, do you have a?
Well, I think we have to stop writing checks first.
Yes.
Right? People are still writing checks. It's funny. I was in Germany last month, and I had a German younger female colleague ask me, if I wrote checks, because she'd seen them in movies, but she'd never seen a check in real life. So I opened up my banking app and I showed her a canceled check just on my app. And she was like, wow, because I've only seen them in movies. One made me feel kind of old, but also brings back the fact that, a lot of people do cling to what they're accustomed to. I mean, I may be right, like 4 checks a year, right? Because there's just some areas in which you need to do that. And I think cash is exactly the same way, right? And so taking a look at it, particularly from an international perspective, I think of my life here in the States and I go, okay, well, what do I need cash for? I need cash to tip people. This is a culture in which if it moves, you tip it, right? And the vast majority of the time, you're going to tip in cash. Now, in China, and it was mentioned in a previous panel, there's actually homeless people with QR codes, and you can tips or you can give someone money on the street for your QR with via your mobile wallet. You can pay for just a beverage or a snack, and it's not a big deal. That's just how you do it, and we're not there yet from that perspective. So, and I don't know if we ever will be. Again, it comes back to where, what is that tipping point? In what area do we become cashless? Is it that we're all gone and no one remembers cash anymore or checks anymore? But there are areas, particularly all around the world, where you've got 2 different things going on. One, you've got China, where, their first computing device is a mobile device, and that's what they're accustomed to, and that's what they do, and everyone's pretty comfortable with it. But then you've got areas where cash is truly king. You'd mentioned the stats about the U.S. and how many transactions are cash. Well, I saw something from MasterCard, I think just this morning. It said 85% of transactions globally are cash. And you've got areas, particularly parts of Southeast Asia or in Latin America, where you may have a bank account, but you may not, and you can get paid and to a bank account, and you'll run to the ATM, take out your cash, but these people are still able to participate in e-commerce, even as cash consumers. So there's been a lot of workarounds. So short answer is cash is going to stick around as long as we feel a need for it.
Bruce, how do you feel about cash? Are we moving away, and how does it get preserved? What are the catalysts?
Well, I agree with really everything that both Elliot and Catherine said. I think they made some very good, valid observations there. I'll give you some stats here. A recent Pew study showed that 1/3 of Americans don't use cash right now on a typical weekly basis. On the other hand, 8.4 million households are unbanked or were unbanked in 2017. And those folks are living purely on a cash situation. So as with any issue of this nature, it's very complex. It has significant social overtones. There's some real dangers, I think, if we as a society allow cash to go away. I think a lot of folks who are living on a cash basis are going to be in trouble. I think ultimately there can be technological solutions to come to the fore, but it's going to be be a pretty rough transition to say we're doing away with cash. And I think we've seen this kind of where the public head is at this in recent legislation. New Jersey recently adopted state legislation that requires retail businesses, brick and mortar, to accept cash as a matter of law, under penalty if you don't. The city of Philadelphia passed a similar law as an ordinance recently. Most major cities in the country, New York, Chicago, LA, have similar laws under consideration, as do many other states. There are 2 bills that have been introduced in Congress to require cash acceptance. So, I think in the U.S., we love cash still. Okay, there's more cash in circulation now than ever before. At the same time, I think if you look at the transactions, some of the data, you cited, and, just some of the data I've seen, it's clear that some transactions are moving from a cash basis to a digital basis. I don't see it as a significant trend at this point. I think the fact that we have so many mobile wallets out there and so many other players in the financial industry in the U.S. is, really slows things down. I mean, there's a reason the U.S. was the last civilized Western country, industrial nation to bring EMV in. And the reason was it's because everyone knew it was going to be tougher than anywhere else. And it was tough. It still is tough. And EMV is, still not even fully implemented. So I think the bottom line is we're in a transition period of some sort. I don't think any of us have a crystal ball to know exactly how much and when, but I do think cash in both the U.S. and worldwide is so embedded in the collective consciousness that it's not going to go away anytime soon, whether that's 10 years, 20 years, or ever. Like I said, there's still 50,000 payphones in the U.S. Today, and people that rely on them. So I wish I did have a crystal ball. I think it's incumbent upon us, though, to make the transition as smooth as we can for society, for our own sake, for commerce's sake. And I think that means giving consumers choice, preserving the choice to use cash while we bring all these other methods in. Keeping cash as a safety net, because when Target goes down and they can't accept cards, you're glad you have cash. Whenever there's a hurricane, first thing we do is go and get cash. There have been a number of cases where networks are down, et cetera, and we don't want to be here looking at each other with no other alternative. I operated payphones in Lower Manhattan when the trade towers went down and there was no cell phone service, and people lined up at the payphones for quite some time. We gave away free calls for quite some time there too.
Yeah, Alec, let me turn to you actually, playing a few of the sentences that Bruce just said. You have a global view in a way that we each would love to have. Like, what do you see as sectors that are flipping or are going to flip over to cash or be reticent sooner?
So when I think about tipping points, I think transit is the obvious area that will likely flip and will do so in a way that will bring far greater consistency and reduce a whole lot of friction. I know in the UK when transit, TfL, went contactless, everyone was focused on the kind of contactless payment element and the fact it was going open loop from what was effectively a stored value prepaid. But the operational efficiencies that everybody realized, I don't think anyone really had a real understanding for before it went. And by that, what I mean is all those queues at the machines to top up a card or buy a ticket, or people were kind of going down to the subway on a Monday morning to the office, and then they're realizing that they're free of standing in line at the queue. So there was some efficiencies I don't think people really, because everyone was so heads down in terms of the transition, the technical work, the implementation, the level of efficiencies that were created out of that were huge. And I think the same thing will happen here.
Do you see, are there any technical holdups, or is it a marketing, consumer adoption, show us the need at this point?
In general, you mean specifically in?
Well, in
use
general, I mean,
cases?
transit, I could see, I mean, I think any of us who ride Chicago this week, it was on a card. If you go to O'Hare by transit, it's a card. But just in general, is there a technical holdup or technologies that have to be deployed? Like we were talking about 5G yesterday here. We all have to have cell phones that take 5G. There's a big technical holdup. But you can convince me that's better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in simple terms, you're talking about contactless acceptance,
Yeah.
which in the US is well on its way now. It still has a huge way to go, but I think by the end of this year we'll be in a very different space, and the same in terms of cards. I think it's on record in terms of the issuers and the networks and their support for issuing more contactless plastic. And then you're just talking about whether or not people care whether it's a card or a phone, or and that's a whole different kind of debate in terms of whether or not payment should be on a card versus a device versus something else.
And it becomes more of a marketing item. Hey, Catherine, I asked you a similar question more on the B2B side, and on e-commerce is separate. It's all cashless reasonably.
Actually, no.
Go ahead,
No,
please.
it's not. And I mean, PPRO focuses on the cross-border e-commerce space.
Yeah.
And yeah, we all think, well, it's got to be cashless because what are you going to do? Open up like a CD drive and throw 20 in there? And no, you're not. Or whatever you're buying. There's my card that I've got a slot here, but it's for for a credit card. You can't actually put money in there. But in many parts of the world, there actually is an amazing convergence of a cash-based economy with e-commerce. So as an example, OXXO is a payment method in Mexico. And OXXO is also a chain of convenience stores in Mexico. And I mentioned before, a lot of Mexicans enjoy their cash-based economy, and there are a number of there's maybe not as much trust in the banks, and certainly you've got varying levels of that throughout Latin America. And I've got other examples of like boletos in Brazil and other things that have been mentioned throughout the conference. But what my user experience looks like when I choose OXXO to shop online, which is something that PPRO can enable for payment service providers, is I go and I shop just like I would normally shop. I take my things, I put them in my cart, and my checkout process, where typically someone would select Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, or whatever, there's an option for OXXO. And with OXXO, I select that, and what I get is essentially a voucher, and I physically go to the OXXO convenience store, and I pay cash at the store. So there, because I want to use cash, that's how I pay for my goods. And it's something that, it's a different way of doing omnichannel, or a different way of combining, clicks and bricks, but that is something that is common in a number of parts of the world. So you can do e-commerce with cash. You just have to be a bit more innovative about it in a way that just seems odd to Americans.
And actually, we talk about that with Western Union here, where you can walk into Western Union and buy a plane ticket, or you've done everything online, you come in with your plane ticket number, you walk into Western Union and hand out $359 or whatever and go to New York.
And, in Brazil, where they use boletos, even about a quarter of business payments, B2B payments, are done with boletos.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, you can go to a financial institution or other areas in Brazil and pay for these things in cash, even for business payments, which is very much in the States, dominated by check.
Yeah, which I do right about 5 years also. So, and for ATMs, obviously, it's a little bit different. But what keeps us going to the ATM? What keeps the ATM relevant as we move forwards for all of us here and those people outside here?
Yes. Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, obviously, as long as people feel the need to have cash for all the reasons that have been expressed here, having tips, just having cash in your wallet, for whatever reason your card is not accepted or your bank decides you just shut it off on you or whatever the case may be. And I think that's most people I talk to view, it's not an either or situation. I think we need to realize it's not either or. It's a transitional situation where we have to figure out how to make the two coexist in a positive way for consumers. Having said that, we certainly want to see the ATM morph into something more than just a cash box. ATMs are used for a lot more than that in other countries, much more so than they are in the U.S. It's been tried. It hasn't had great success up to now, but I'm hopeful. There's new things coming about. I mentioned in a session earlier a new program involving the ability to purchase virtual gift cards at the ATM. So you can, on the ATM, you can get a gift card just like you would go to the rack and pick a card, except it's virtual, and you can send it virtually with a greeting card and everything. It's a pretty cool program, brand new. And ultimately what you're seeing, I think, is an inevitable move to more reliance on software as opposed to hardware to drive the ATM. And as that happens, I think we're going to see a lot more services being made possible. One initiative we're pursuing in NAC involves the introduction of biometric authentication into the ATM, as well as attempting to standardize. It was mentioned in the prior panel with FIDO, the importance of standardization. We've seen the same thing, and we're working now to standardize, try to come up with standards to enable cardless cash in a more user-friendly, uniform fashion. And with that, I think, having the biometric authentication to accompany a cardless cash transaction, and we have a card present and a card not present transaction as our traditional categories, but this really is something different in our mind. It's a virtual card present, physical card not present situation.
Card present, not present is a whole other realm of problems and issues here. Boy, if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and we're looking out. Please, Andrew.
So I'm based in Atlanta, and so one of the iconic companies in Atlanta is Coca-Cola. And I always thought it was interesting that they would look at what's the total amount of liquid that people consume and think about their progress in terms of market share of the overall consumption, right? So that would incent you to get into water and other things. But they're thinking about these big macro goals around owning a market share. And I'm curious for Elliot. I know you're probably not, doing it exactly that way, but are there any sort of macro goals that are talked about at MasterCard in terms of this transition from cash to digital? And how do you think about that? Like, we're successful when we move the needle globally, and any goals like that talked about at MasterCard?
So I guess the way that we look at it really is it's not so much around cash to digital as cash to card, or as it continues to transpire, it's cash to a variety of alternative payment rails, as you will see by a number of our recent acquisitions. So that's in support of choice and looking at, again, in different parts of the world, you'll have different opportunities to deliver different products and different propositions. To Catherine's point, take Germany, for example, very similar, where you can actually buy things online and then end up, you have an invoice and they turn up and you kind of pay them cash, and crazy stuff to English people and Americans. It doesn't really stack up like that. So I don't think it would be fair to say we have specific targets around that. Our targets are more around making sure that things are safe, simple, secure. So as they transition, if people want to do things digitally, that we're doing that in a safe, simple, and secure way, and we're following the same kind of level of consistency that you'd see as it comes out of that kind of cash system.
Okay, great.
Cool. And actually, it brings up, with every statement, you bring up 5 more questions in my mind. But I am going to flip a little bit to security, actually, because you guys have all talked about that. Obviously, when I have a $20 bill, it's utterly secure, sort of. It could be false. But how do you guys deal with, do you see security issues that are coming that you're having to deal with that are preventing adoption or preserving adoption?
So that's kind of interesting. Years ago, I worked on some of the first payroll prepaid cards, right? And the theory behind it was these people that are unbanked are going to go to a check cashing place, pay an exorbitant fee, and then they're going to be targets because, it's pretty obvious. Someone on Friday afternoon walks into a check cashing place and they walk out. That's pretty easy to, to realize that they probably have a lot of cash and can be robbed. And that was one of the value propositions that we had to check cashing establishments, where the store's less likely to be robbed and the people walking out of the store are less likely to be robbed. Obviously, we have a much different set of theaters now for crime and even for warfare. Right? Cyber is absolutely a theater of war. So it does take a different set of possibilities, because one of the benefits of cash is that if I'm going to rob you, I have to be in physical proximity of you for your cash, or, or your home, or your mattress, wherever it's stuffed, right? But to be able to take money from your bank account, I can be anywhere. I don't even have to really be a person.
Homer Simpson can steal from him.
Yeah. Well, clearly the rise in cybercrime, gives pause to the notion that we're going to do everything digitally that the cyber criminals can go after and hack. And so again, I mean, look, cash is, there was just a study released by the German central bank that said cash is the quickest transaction and the cheapest transaction. So it's kind of like there's a problem in search of, or a solution in search of a problem. But again, I don't think it's an either or situation. I think with cash, there are security issues associated with it. Unfortunately, though, I have to say, it's become an environment where when our folks go in to get cash to load their ATMs, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through these ATMs to fund. Remember, we're a consumer-based spending economy. Where do you think a lot of that comes from? And when you have cash, you're typically going to spend it. So, with all of that cash coming out of the ATMs now, we have our own set of cyber challenges for the ATMs to be hacked. Man-in-the-middle fraud and other frauds are happening. So the ATM operators have a challenge there. The person who's getting money out of the ATM has a challenge. The criminals are not going to rest. They're wherever we can give them an opportunity, they will take it. I think cash, though, as Catherine says, you can't be hacked, and I think that's an important attribute of it.
Sorry, I'm going to have to apologise. I have a flight to catch, so
Yeah,
I have to run.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're out of time.
Okay, let me let
Yeah.
you wrap up with what else you wanted to add, and then we'll.
No,
get your
look,
plan.
the last thing I'll say from me and from MasterCard, I guess, is that choice remains really important to us, and I think it's important to everyone on this panel, right? It's using the appropriate technology in the appropriate sectors, in the appropriate markets to help to do that in a safe, simple, and secure way. The only way you do that is for multiple partners to come together and deliver things in a meaningful way. Sorry.
Thanks, Elliot.
Excellent.
Well done, Elliot.
Yep, here.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Elliot.
Good luck.
Safe
Uphill
travels.
here is easy.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. Actually, and as Elliot works out.
We are.
Yeah, we are going to need.
We're out of time.
We're
Okay.
going to need to wrap so we can
Okay.
get
Yeah.
more speakers.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we will wrap up that so people can catch their own planes. We'd like to thank everyone for coming here. We'd like to thank you for having us. And we hope to see you here in Chicago again about a year from now.
We have